Boom. Live, live, live. Hello, everybody. This is Mike Mills with Verity Mortgage, and this is the Texas Real Estate and Finance Podcast. And today I am bringing in my friend, Amy Cearnal. She is running for mayor. So I'm sure she has a lot of things that she wants to share with us today about why she's running for mayor, what made her decision, how it's impacting her life, because I can imagine it's pretty crazy and chaotic. So without further ado, let's bring in Miss Amy. We'll have a round of applause for you. I got all kinds of production value on this thing.
Awesome. Hey, Mike.
Have too much time on my hands probably is a problem. I don't know. Well, speaking of time on their hands, I don't think you have any time on your hands these days. Would you say that's an understatement?
Yeah, not right now. So we've got 17 days till the race. So we're in dead heat right now.
Yes. So what, just like right off the gate, like what in the world made you decide to run for mayor? I mean, of all things, we've known each other for a little while now, and we've had different conversations about all kinds of stuff. You've never once mentioned anything about running for mayor. And I saw that. I was like, oh my gosh, what happened there?
Yeah. I had to start my kickoff rally with, I'm sorry, I lied to so many of y'all and said I would never, ever run for anything, because here we are. And it really was more of that this was a unique situation where we live in a town of 400,000 people, and we did not have anybody willing to step up and challenge our incumbent. And that's just part of our electoral process, is that really having good candidates to come forward so that the citizens feel like they have a choice is very important to us. I have done a lot of public service leading up to this point, and so it is not a crazy thing to think that I would become mayor, but it also is really about that creating accountability and making sure that our current leadership understands that we are here and just watching and have ideas too of how things can change and get better.
So what you're saying then is that, don't get me wrong, the intent of running for mayor is to get elected mayor.
The intent is to win, yes.
Absolutely. But if anything else, at bare minimum, it's just to put somebody else on the ballot to make sure that at least somebody's getting pushed. So it's not just you just get your job and walk right in the door, right?
Yeah, that's correct. So yeah, I mean, you don't want to feel like as a citizen that you were kind of bullied into one decision. You didn't have anybody that was willing to step up. But it is a tough thing to have people step up to that position, because it is a full-time position for 3 years and for zero pay. So, there's like a little bit of a credit, but it's basically zero. And that's hard. Who can afford to do that? Who is willing to do that? And so it's not surprising that people aren't willing to step up. But it is something that I just think is very important as we go forward.
Well, it's funny when you look at just politics in general. And I actually, I'm kind of at least a national politics enthusiast, I guess you would call it. I don't really put myself into either category per se, because I think they're both messed up in many ways. But what's funny, I think, as a population is that people, general citizens, we pay close attention to guys like, Mitch McConnell and Nancy Pelosi and President Biden and President Trump and all these other, nationally or national level politicians. Mm-hmm. But we lose sight of the fact, I think, that the impact that has on our day-to-day lives is way more local than it is national. Yeah. So the decisions and the people that run for school boards, that run for mayor, that run for city councils, it seems like those things have a direct impact on your life, much greater than the national politics, but very few people tend to pay attention to that. Why do you think that is?
They do. In fact, I'm kind of the opposite, that I do pay more attention to the local side than on the national side. And really just because of what you said, there aren't enough people focusing on the local. And I'm like, well, okay, everybody else is looking at national. Let me really try to help and impact on the local side. And I really think it is one of those that you have a lot of opportunity to make impact if you choose. It's just a lot of people are just like, like it's just really
it's a lot of work.
Apathy. It's not that there's like malice in it or like trying not to know. It's just people just really don't know what's going on the local level a lot of times, and so they're not involved and engaged enough to even really be conversational about some of it, and so they just tend to step back from it. And I hope that this encourages people too to say, hey, it is not impossible to get involved at the local level and really be impactful on what the community does and says and how it continues to evolve. We're all, across the country, we're all at this point in history of that, things are moving forward at a quick clip, and we've got to really make sure that our local jurisdictions are doing that at the right way and not just going off in directions just because it's the feeling of the political whim of some of that.
Well, it's hard. I think the average, again, the average citizen, we have jobs, we have kids, we have sports,
yes.
everything that fills your life up, right?
Yes.
And so you only have so much time outside of those necessities that you have to do to live to pay attention to other things, right? So if you're a sports fan, maybe you're watching the Rangers or the Mavericks or the Stars, or which they tied up the series last night, but your attention's diverted in that direction, and that's enjoyable, that's fun, that's something that brings you pleasure. And then you're like, hey, here's what's on the ballot for the city council next year, and you're like,
right,
it's like, go to sleep, because it's hard to keep people's interest. So like, how do you overcome that when you're going through something like this?
I think some of it is just asking that, sometimes it would be, all the time, it would be more fun and easier to focus on something like watching the Stars game instead of watching a city council meeting or something. Right. Every single time people would choose that.
Yes.
But for somebody saying, hey, I'd love for you to participate here. We have a need for this. You would be a great fit here. Right. And how, like, helping people come along to that. That's really, I would not be sitting here if I hadn't been challenged by that, by people of saying, hey, Amy, we need somebody to run. You're a great person to do that based on what you have done in the past. Like, this is a next natural progression. You should consider this. And my first answer was no. And then it was no again. And no, actually not me. No, thank you. That is really not me. But ultimately, sometimes it is us, and there isn't somebody else that's standing behind to say, okay, if she doesn't do it, then it's somebody else. There may not be somebody else. And so it really is that importance of being confident in asking friends and neighbors to join, but also in being comfortable in saying yes.
So you actually had people coming to you saying, hey, you need to do this. You need to do this. Yeah. And that was kind of the push that made it.
Yes. It would not have been on my radar otherwise, really.
Well, that's good. That means that, there were people out there that were, either looking for something different, or, feeling like you said, there needs to be another piece of the conversation other than just one side of things. And that the fact that they looked at you and said, hey, would you help us do that? That's great. I think it seems like, and again, it's hard to judge the difference between national and local politics, but you look sometimes at, say, national politics, for example. And one of the problems that I personally have in that realm is that there's so much money involved, and there's so much outside influence into what decisions are made on a policy level. Again, this is national, this is not local, or at least it
is a little bit on both,
to my knowledge. Right. But even to the point where you hear about bills that are written by, attorneys for super PACs that are coming out of, that are presented to congressmen and senators and saying, here's the bill that we want you to present. And they barely read over it. They barely understand what's in there. And all they're doing is just checking the right box to make sure that they're doing what they're supposed to do, so that way the money keeps coming to their campaign. Yes. And that's a very difficult thing, I think, when you look at politics, to say, well, the people that you would most want to be in charge, or at least have a say in where the direction of the city or the state or the national politics goes, they're probably the ones that are least interested in doing it, because either they're already relatively successful in their careers and they're just like, I'm going to keep doing this because that's a whole lot of headache, or they don't want to get into that game because it feels dirty, because it's just like, okay, well, who am I beholden to now in order to make sure that, I can continue operating my campaign? So like, how do you navigate just the funds of dealing with how, you got to print signs, you can't, I know you work because you work all the time, but to say that doing this doesn't take away from you selling homes would be 100%. An understatement, right?
That's what we've had to look at. What does that look like, Amy, working for free for the city for 3 years after election? But we've also had to look at, what does that look like to drop out some of our business during this time while we're going and doing all the things. And luckily Spencer's there to kind of help come beside me and help with some of it. Our agents have been very understanding, but ultimately there definitely is some cost there on the opportunity cost of what you could make in business by not participating in it. Right. There's also that, what you said of the fundraising side of how to do it. And I will tell you, I'm such not the politician that was the part that I had really always said too. Why would I ever want to do that? Why would I ever want to encourage someone to donate to my campaign to buy stupid things like signs or flyers or send out mailers? Like, what in the world? That is such a waste. Why wouldn't they just contribute that to one of our favorite charities and really let that actually go to something good? What I have had to step back with is say, okay, if I am taking this so seriously that I am willing to put that working for free for 3 years on the table,
Mhm.
then I also need to allow other people who love the city to come beside me and give dollars that they're not willing to give up that time, but they are willing to give those dollars to make that happen.
Right.
Now, to your point too, I do want to make sure that those dollars are no strings attached dollars too. And I've been very fortunate to have really candid conversations with our investors to say, like, that's just not how I play.
Sure.
Like, I'm a rookie at all of this. And so I'm like, gosh, I don't know. Maybe there was supposed to be some sort of pay to play. That's not what I do. So y'all let me know if that's, and really there's been a lot of grace with it. So I hope that is encouraging for other people too, that want to get involved and want to consider that, is that there is some opportunity to come beside candidates and really help make that all come together in a more genuine way.
Have you been able to do a fair amount or decent amount of like small donation stuff where, because I don't know what the campaigns, like crowdfunding or what would it call? I don't know.
I've gotten everything from $20, donations to multiple $1,000 donations. And so it has been very helpful. Ultimately we got into the race late, really because we were hoping that another candidate would come forward. Candidly, I mean, we were every night like,
anybody yet?
I
mean,
seriously, we're, when there was another candidate that was going to run, and when she decided not to, I said, man, I'm going to be praying for that next candidate. I am just really hopeful that that's going to come forward. And in no way did I think that was me. And so really when then people were talking to me about me, I was like, oh my gosh, still there's got to be somebody else out there. We were refresh every night on the computer saying like, somebody else is hearing this call more than we are. Somebody else is more prepared. But ultimately, sometimes it is that, God equips those who are called. And so we just step into it and say, all right, I'm here.
Here we go.
Let me know what I can do. And let's see how this goes.
So, anytime someone's running for office, everybody will say, okay, what makes you qualified to, direct or lead the direction of the city? So now I know a lot of the things that you've been through in committees and boards and things you've been on, but just for anybody that would watch this, like what do you feel like has put you in, what experiences have you had over the years that have put you in a position now where you feel like you could handle a job like this and be able to deal with all the stress and the problems that come with these kind of things, and still be able to, keep your sanity?
Yeah. Well, I haven't proven that is going to be successful yet on keeping the sanity.
You're working on it. You're working on it.
Yeah. So, but I do think it is this continued commitment to the community that has really helped with that for me. So when I started in real estate, one of the things that I took very personally was that if we're selling that community, we need to be invested in making that community great.
Right.
And so as part of our business planning every year, I have 25% of the time that I would put towards the business as being put towards the community. And so that's just something I've always taken seriously. And so over those many years, there have been a lot of things that I've gotten the opportunity to do. So with professional organizations like the Board of Realtors or the Chamber of Commerce, with nonprofits like the Aware Board or Arlington Urban Ministries, I've also done Leadership Arlington. I was chair of Downtown Arlington Management Corporation. I've done offices with the city, as far not elected offices, but commissions and committees and those kind of things. And so it just is that breadth of time that gets passed where got relationships and have some institutional knowledge of what things are going on. And so then that leads to something else. Maybe I should have said no to some of those so that I wouldn't be here right now, but here we are.
But here we are. Here we are. Is there any, like, okay, so let's go ahead and get on to, obviously you're running for mayor. So you had to have some things in your head where you say, okay, if I were to get elected, here are a couple things, that I'd like to look at, either, reevaluating. Sometimes people say, I'm going to change this. And it's like, well, until you actually get in there and you see how it works, you get to see how the cake is made.
Yes.
You can't say that, oh, I'm going to make these. Well, you don't know. I mean, you may get there and you'll be like, oh, I guess I can. There's nothing I can do there. Yeah. So what are some stuff that you would look at, either reevaluating how the city does, or even new initiatives, things that you feel like should at least have up for discussion on things that could be brought forth? Like, give me some ideas of, your platform.
Yeah. And I've been telling everybody, I'm like, I'm a fairly terrible candidate at this because I don't have it's 1, 2, 3 things. And if those aren't done, then we're not successful.
Sure.
Because it is we've got to listen to what the residents say and then be able to bring that back to see what is possible and actually put some of that in action. And so that really is my motivator here, is really being a voice for what the citizens want and how can we work to take those things forward. what I'm hearing most in kind of this listening tour of meeting people and seeing some of this is that they are feeling a little frustrated in Arlington that there is this bright and shiny light on the entertainment district for our visitors, but not as much on their neighborhoods and their commercial corridors that they're visiting on a regular basis. And so it is looking at then from a leadership perspective of how do we look at resources to see what resources we could devote in a different way to that. And so some of that is going back to my background of finance and management and pulling apart budgets and really looking at and asking some of the hard questions of what, where are some opportunities that we could devote some funding here to really make impact. And so that's really what I'm committed to do is come in and ask the hard questions, continue to fight for our residents, and really make sure that they are getting what they need as a stakeholder in that community.
Well, actually, that's a great point. I've always thought, like, and again, you're not going to be president, but anytime, whether it be president, whether it be mayor, whether it be governor, whether it be, you're kind of the CEO of that, entity, whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
And they always, when you see these presidential debates, and I'm sure they have all these questions. Well, what would you do about this situation? What would you do about this situation? And to have the expectation that one human is going to understand every facet of the city government is just, it's insane. Like you can't, there's no way. Right. Yeah. So your job really is, and the president's job and the governor's job and the mayor's job is to, like you said, ask questions about what's currently being done. Why are we doing it this way? Why is this being handled in this manner? Why is this money being allocated here? But then also to put people around you that you value their opinion, right?
Absolutely.
I value what you say. I value what you say and what you think because you understand the economics of how the water district works. You understand how the entertainment district is set up with all of the different entities and corporations involved in creating all these different buildings and facilities and how the city plays a role with taxes and all that stuff, right? You have to have people that understand those and be able to put people in position to give you good advice because you're not going to have all the answers. But that's why, the whole idea of term limits comes into play because I think you need a fresh set of eyes on things from time to time. And they say, well, the people that argue with term limits would say, well, it's a hard job and you have to be in there for a while to really understand it. You got to go through it. And I understand that sentiment. However, if there's plenty of positions within the city and within the state that are not elected, they are paid for and hired and they have a job, right?
Yeah.
And so your responsibility as the leader of that entity is to make sure that those people are competent and understand their role. And you ask questions that they have to answer because, the last guy said this, but I don't think it feels that way. So here's what I want to see. So when you look at how government is structured in general, do you feel like that is your role as a mayor is to come in and say, hey, my job is to evaluate how everything is put together. No, I don't. I'm not an expert on every single facet of this, but I'm going to learn. And I've gone through this type of management stuff before.
Yes. I think 100% that is where it is. And I think there is that coupled responsibility of accountability to staff too.
Right.
So term limits did create a situation in Arlington anyway, where our city staff became very powerful because it's just a matter of time before the mayor, there'll be another mayor and council.
Right.
And that in some ways that is totally fine. I mean, they've done an excellent job in so many ways, but there are also there's room for improvement on things. And
always.
So we've got to be able to have those conversations and be able to come to the table and say, okay, yes, this might've been the way that we've done it, but we need to look at what's that next generation of idea. What's that, how are we going to move forward and really make sure that we are staying relevant and that we are doing the best thing and being most judicious with those resources that we have.
So, running for mayor and going through that process, I'm sure you had an idea of what it was going to be like, but the idea versus the reality are two very different things.
Yeah.
So going through this process and doing all this, what are some things that you've learned that you're kind of like, I didn't expect that. And this is a new facet for me. I wasn't ready for.
Yeah. There's a lot of angry people out there. And so that really is like a little sad for me. I'm like, I wish we could all just get along and like figure some of that out. So, I mean, I think that's really been my biggest concern with this race, and that I really hope that post May 6th, that there is a time to really create unity with that.
Right.
And that's my prayer, really, whether Jim or I are in office, that this time is this kind of uncomfortable, like coming apart to make this decision,
Yeah.
but then that there will be a coming back together of being knit back together and really all working towards this common goal of making Arlington a great city.
Right.
And so I think it's just, it feels right now in this coming apart that there are so many people that are so frustrated one way or the other.
Yeah.
And I just really hope that they can see the heart behind, like, the goal is for this to be a better place and a more responsive and, just genuinely better. Yeah, I'm trying to think of a better word, but it's better than what we've got now. And I think it's one of those that we've always got to be growing to. It's not something that even in 3 years, if I'm elected, I could sit down and say, okay, well, we're good. Like, we're just going to stay on this exact same path. It's not that. We've got to make sure that that path is always being refined and looking at how can we make sure that we are getting to where we need to be.
Well, I think is on the thread of, dealing with angry folks, I would imagine it's not too dissimilar from like running a business in that, when you run a brokerage and deal with, people buying homes all the time, and these are very emotional, transactions, and there's a lot of that goes on there. Me too. And what we remember is if we say we close, I don't know, 30 or 40, you close 30 or 40 contracts in a year. Well, probably 90% of those went great. Yeah. They were fantastic. Right?
99.
Yes,
we're awesome.
99%. Well, because things go beyond your control, right? Right. That happened. Totally. But we remember, and the loudest and the most impactful are those 1% or 10% that don't, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So when you're in a city of how many people are in Arlington?
400,000.
400,000. So in a city of 400,000, if 1% of that have a problem with something, right? That's a lot of people. That's a whole lot of people that are upset. And it seems like this is like overwhelming. But then when you take a step back and go, well, wait a minute, it's still just a small percentage of the people that are upset about this. It's like that squeaky wheel gets the grease kind of thing, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And usually those that are most upset about something tend to bark the loudest, right? Even though their opinion of the situation might be the minority opinion, they just have the loudest voice in the room. So how do you manage something like that when you're dealing with an individual that has this really strong passion and opinion about something, but then when you look on the whole and you go, I don't think everybody else feels that way. How do you balance that?
Some of it for me is just listening. And, and I think you too, as a business owner, and as, especially when you're managing other LOs too, that there are times when the consumer just wants to be mad, and we've just got to let that process be. And, maybe that's important for mental health and some of these things that we've got going on. And so really, that's really been the process. It is also helpful for me to hear all opinions. And so I'm like, yes, bring it. I want to hear, I want to hear both sides of this. And so that way, then we can make appropriate decisions going forward. Because if it is just one side being presented, that's not a healthy way to go about it either. So, so right now it's just a lot of listening and a lot and I want to be there. I mean, my cell phone's on everything. I'm like, call me. I'm not trying to hide. I want to talk about it. You can be mad at me. That's fine. But I want to talk to you about it. Yeah. And so that's really been the process up until this point.
So how are Spencer and the kids handling all this fun stuff?
They're good. I think when we talk to the boys about like, hey, this what we're considering. What do y'all think? They're like, yeah, okay, like whatever. It's just,
course, you're doing another thing, Mom.
It's like the next in the line of what Mom does, so it's no big deal. So so they have been so supportive. It's been very helpful to have a partner in Spencer to be able to help make sure that we've got everybody covered and that we're able to do everything. I had a campaign event Tuesday night. It was Davis's birthday, and so he like kind of at the last minute put together some friends to go to Top Golf. I'm like, I cannot go, but luckily your dad can. So, so we're able to play off each other and really make sure that we're covering everything.
Well, I think that's the thing. Sometimes, we may lose sight of the fact that when we have people that are, really you're a public servant, right? When you're running for office, you're serving on student council, when you're serving on
Yeah.
city council or whatever the case may be, you are giving your time in most cases for no money whatsoever, for the betterment of the city and what you feel like, is a benefit. But in doing that, you are sacrificing another side of your life. And that's hard. I mean, it's a very difficult thing, especially because I know you were, obviously you've been running your brokerage for a long time, but the time commitment for that versus running for mayor is two very different things. And so, you at least had opportunities previously to go to the baseball games and go to the cross country meets and all the stuff that, that you guys do as a family. And now, you're having to be taken away from that. And that, I can imagine, just for your soul, that hurts a little bit, because you want to be with your family and spend time with them. Especially, I look at it right now. My daughter's 15 and my son is 13. And my wife and I talk about it on a pretty regular basis that, she's only going to be living with us for like 3 more years.
Oh my gosh.
And then they're gone. And, and then it's like, you're like, what are we going to do?
Yeah.
What are we going to do after that? So like, I can imagine, how are you dealing with just the emotional side of it, of being there with your family all the time and then having to be torn away, because that's a lot. That's a heavy weight to carry.
Yeah. So, we have been very intentional about making sure that we have time on the calendar for them first. So before we plan out any of the other events, it's like, okay, family dinner's here, really, creating that intentionality, I think, helps. And then also creating some awareness with the boys of like, look, I'm going to be there for most, but I'm probably not gonna be there for all. Right. And so y'all just need to be prepared for that. If that's a problem, let me know. And really that really has been our story for part of this anyway. I mean, I have always been of that, there are, I really love going to a lot of the baseball games, but I am also not a mom that needs to sit at every single minute of every single play.
Baseball can be a little slow sometimes.
Luckily we have Game Changer and those kind of things. So,
yeah.
So I think it is just this kind of family commitment of saying, hey, this is what this looks like going forward. And also giving them a really cool opportunity to see what it looks like to live a life of service and to be invested in the community and to really put that yes on the table and say, hey, this is what we feel like is the right thing for right now. So we're going to go for it. And that does mean that we have to sacrifice some of these other things.
Well, no, that actually, that's a great point. I mean, you are setting an example, and that's, I think, especially these days with, there's a lot of single parent households. There's a lot of kids that are growing up in some, challenging situations, and to have both parents at home and the expectation that mom and dad are going to be at every single, I mean, I don't know how it was when you were growing up. No. When I was growing up, I think my dad went to like, I don't know. I played baseball, football, all the way from like kindergarten to high school. I think he went to like 4 games, maybe. I don't know. My mom was there a little bit more, but it was a different time, right? It was kind of like, listen, you have a roof, you have food, you have clothing.
Every day you're going to eat.
That's
every
right.
single day.
Y'all. I didn't need for anything. I had all the things that I needed. So just because I wasn't getting a hug every single day, it was, we survived, right?
Yes, yeah.
So
luckily we have my parents are in town. Spencer's parents are not far. We've got a great network of family too that comes around and supports them too.
But serving as an example to say, hey, look, if you care about your community and you care about, what happens around you, because it does impact you, it impacts your day-to-day life. And it's always, there's a guy, I won't say his name, people get upset about it, but he was giving a speech one time at a college, and there was a student that stood up, and she was asking questions about a book that he'd written, because it was about, these habits for life. And it was like, get up and make your bed, get up and, take care of yourself first and then worry about other things. And, she was like, well, how can we do that when we have to worry about climate change and all these other things? And his response was, it was like, well, here's the thing. How about you go to college? How about you become an attorney? How about you run for office? And then you can have an impact on that, or become a billionaire, and then you can have a say on that. But until then, get your own house in order, and then you can have, an impact on those things that you're looking towards. So to have someone in your life as a child that says, hey, look, I care about the city, and you're practicing what you're preaching. You're saying, I don't necessarily, it's not at the top of my list of things to do, but there's a need, and I'm going to fill that need because I have a calling for it. And I think that's the type of stuff that makes your children grow into adults that look and value, the people around them and their community, and have a say on what impacts their life there.
Yeah, hopefully, I think we are like more already like starting to mourn the loss of Davis being 17, about to leave school and some of that, but we all are also like, the fire is turned up on the accountability of that. We've got to make sure that he is this grown-up
Adult
man person that is going to be able to make good decisions going forward, because we won't have as much impact later. And that's I think our bigger concern, that we really want to make sure that he's got all the tools necessary to be able to be that functioning member of society.
So I'm curious about your opinion on this. I don't know how much you've dug into it, because I didn't prep you with this one, but property taxes is a big deal right now, all over the state, all over this area in particular, because people have seen their property values, go through the roof, and which is, on one hand, is great, right? Yeah. Your house was you bought it for $300,000 5 years ago, and it's worth $5. Okay, that's fantastic. However, that also comes along with property taxes, because in the state of Texas, we don't have state income tax. So a lot of our state revenue is collected through property taxes. So right now, I believe it got through the Senate, where they're going to cap the amount that they can raise property taxes per year on current homeowners. Because I think right now it's 10% across the board.
Well, jurisdictionally, yeah.
Right, yeah. And then they're also increasing the homestead exemption. And I think there was one other thing that I'm not remembering right now, but I've seen news articles about it all over the place. And with things like this, it always cracks me up, because, the Dallas Morning News will run an article and say, this is going through, the Senate's approved it, whatever, but then it's got to go to the House, and the House has to approve it as well. Well, the House may have different opinions on how they think this stuff should be managed. Yeah. So number one is, what do you think the likelihood of that actually passing is? What's your opinion on it? How do you think, it should be calculated or, put together? And then is there anything that you think would be better and more beneficial when it comes to property taxes that's not being addressed right now?
Yeah. I did spend some time in Austin last month, really talking to all of our local representatives to talk about really some of these topics, and property tax was definitely one of them that came up. I was hearing that really the bills out of the Senate were more favorable than the ones out of the House. And so hopefully that will go through, and the House will adopt based on that. They even kind of saw some of the writing on the wall with that.
Right.
It's hard to know when you're just talking to a few, so maybe it won't go that way, but it is looking like that is a really good chance of happening on that. They all want to be able to put that feather in their cap too.
Sure. Got to get reelected. We lowered your taxes. Yes.
For sure.
Everybody's favorite thing.
So there is something to be said for that. Locally, so in Arlington, the current council reduced the tax rate by 2 cents in this cycle.
Real quick on that. So in that case, I'm maybe misunderstood on this. Yeah. So I always thought that the tax rate, not because, people get confused. You get taxed on the value of your home, and that's the one that moves it the most. But the actual rate, I thought it had to be voted. So the county can actually lower, or the legislature can, or city council can actually lower it without a vote.
Well, they without a electoral vote. Yes. Yeah. So they would control. And so this was the 2022 number. Okay. So that they came down on, and really both city and ISD have impact on that.
Okay.
Now how the money is actually distributed and used,
that's a whole other argument. Yes.
But so on that, my concern is, well, we went up 14% on our, receipts over the last 2 years. That's a big increase. So
you mean the receipts as far as the money collected, or as far as the bills that
money collected. Okay. Yeah. So we're getting in more property tax than we planned on, because of exactly what you're saying. Increased values are happening. And so we gave back this little bit on the rate to try to compensate for that. And I understand the mentality of that. And I understand some of that is feather and cap type stuff too, of saying, hey, we've got to do something to help
but you still have
create more attainable housing options, make sure that families are not feeling so much of the pinch. Where my concern is that I really want to make sure that we have a sustainable funding mechanism. Right. And at the same time, we also have a bond on our current ballot for another $278 million, which is a 5-part bond, most of it being in roads, but in some other public things. And, again, more capital expense. I get it that's not super fun to budget for in your regular budget.
Right.
But, we have to in our household, right? You have to in your household. And so at some point, we can't just keep bond. We've really got to figure out that sustainability on the budget side. Now that is a huge ask, and that's not something we've done before. So I am personally supporting all 5 sections of the current bond that are on the ballot, because we're in a situation where we can't afford to not.
You need it. Yeah.
We've got to, at this point, then we can start looking at how can we be a little more sustainable on it. But there's a lot of people that don't love that I wouldn't have reduced taxes, but ultimately I wouldn't have reduced taxes if we still needed those dollars. And to me, if you're asking for more money over here, then we still needed those dollars.
Well, and that's the thing, again, because people don't always pay attention to this stuff. Because I personally too am you have to pay the bills, right? The bills have to be paid.
Right.
So there has to be a way to collect revenue for the city in order to pay the bills. And where we think is, people think about taxes, bad. But taxes pay for police officers, taxes pay for firefighters, taxes pay for roads, taxes pay for schools, taxes pay for a lot of things. And if you continually cut, then those things move more so into the private sector, which in some cases is good. Okay. But in a lot of cases, do you want the police department run by the private sector for profit?
No.
I don't think you do, right?
No.
So you got to figure out how to balance that, right?
Yeah, and we can't trade resources on some of that. It's not like, we're spending $1 and saving this many lives or whatever with police, but we, at some point, there is this thought of that you can't just that you've got to have those resources in order to spend to make sure that we are impacting some of these metrics that we need to make sure are moving in the right direction on a lot of this. And so it's not to say, I think it's a hard thing for somebody coming outside that has not been kind of behind the curtain of what's happening on the finance side to be able to say anything with 100% certainty. But it is saying like, hey, I want to know, I want to ask questions. I want to cause that accountability to staff and want to say, are there resources that we can pull off of here to be in another way? Our current police budget is strong in a good way, really, but we've also got to make sure that we're getting the most out of that as we can. So.
Well, in recent years over the last, and this is where, on the side of police officers, it's really tough for them because let's say the last 20 years, right? We have gone from having police officers be what we perceive as what a police officer's job is to also now they're settling domestic disputes and they're, going out and being counselors, to people when they're having to go pull people off the streets because they don't have a place to live. And there's somewhat of a homeless issue in certain parts. So you have all of these things that come into play and our police officers are the ones that are having to deal with this. And, oh, by the way, we're trying not to pay them as much at the same time. So it's like, okay, well, you can't ask them to do all of these things and then not give them, not only the pay, but the training to do this stuff as well. And
equipment and all those things too. Yeah.
Yes. All that kind of stuff. And it's so difficult because again, the average citizen is tax bad. But this stuff pays for so much. That same person is upset that there's a pothole in their street that's been there for 6 months that they, bust an axle on all the time. And it's like, there's a give and take here. And until you can have, and that's always been my biggest frustration with politics in general is that everything's always black and white, right? Tax bad or tax all. And it's like, or take my guns all, or, give, or give everything. And it's like, no, there is a reasonable, spectrum of a place to land. And it doesn't have to be black and white. Yeah. It can be somewhere in the middle. The argument or the discourse comes in figuring out what that balance is. And that's why it is important to have, red and blue on both sides, because you want to have disagreements on subjects because that's how you come to a compromise, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And that gives that equity and representation of making sure that all parties are heard and that they are able to bring to the table the ideas that are coming from their background and their place, their scope of what it is. So I'm excited to hear from all and welcome that as it goes in.
So let's fast forward to May 6th, right? Election day, May 6th. If you're what day is that on?
Saturday.
It's a Saturday. Oh, well, that's good. Yeah. We're finally figuring out how to put election days on days where people don't have to work. I still think
in May anyway.
Yes, well, in May. I still think whenever we have election days, they should be national holidays, but that's just my opinion. But because more people get access to vote, we want more people saying things. But when you get into office, we're gonna project into the future. When you get into there, what do you think in your mind? And again, once you show up, things change. There's always the joke about when Obama was president about how, he had hope and change and all these things. And then he shows up the first day and they're like, all right, hope and change, come in here. We're going to show you a couple things and see why this hope and change It'll work.
Yes.
So when you show up on the first day, things could change. But let's just assume it goes the way you plan. What do you think the first, 25, 50, 100 days in office look like for you as far as the things that you want to try to dig into first and learn the most about right away?
Yeah. So budget being probably number one, is really looking at that. And then really just hearing from other groups over that first bit to get to where I'm as conversational about where they are and their goals and objectives as we go forward. And I say that like, even city committees, but also outside committees that were really just coming alongside and saying like, catch me up kind of on where we go so that way we can start working together towards some common goals.
Yeah.
The council normally takes off in July. And so it's like, we've got this like awkward May, June time and then July. And so I'm really hopeful by the end of July that I really will be more 100% ready to go.
Yeah.
Well,
that's something where I think when you first show up, I mean, it's really important to start building relationships, right? Like you have to get to know the city council members. You have to get to know all the department heads and, everything within the city, because in order for you to get your opinion, listened to and felt and whatever, then you have to have relationships with these people so they know that you're coming from a place of, hey, look, I'm caring about this for the right reasons. It's not just because I have an ego and I'm in charge now and I get to make the decisions. But, I think those first couple of months will probably be really important for you to, sit down and get to know each one of these individuals, because you guys are going to be working together for the next 3 years, right? Mm-hmm. So,
so that's really my thought, is that, that gives that ramp time to really come in and look. The nice thing is I sit on so many boards now and really am involved and have a lot of those relationships already. So it's not starting from zero, it's starting from some sort of base, but then growing from there.
So getting into real estate a little bit, because these things do overlap to some degree. Affordable housing is a real issue right now. It's an issue all across the country, but especially here. I mean, I bought my first house in 2004 or 3, something like that. It was 20 years ago. It was in Arlington. It was right off of Shorewood Drive and right off in Lake Arlington, right in that nice neighborhood. Yeah. It was fantastic. We paid $130,000 for that house. And my interest rate at the time was 6.5%. But I had I think it was $1,100 payment. Taxes were low. It was great. And It was a starter house for me and my wife. We lived there for 6 or 7 years. Now, that was right before the crash happened, but we still sold our house for the same thing that we bought it for, even after the crash. Oh, great. That house is now a unicorn. And that particular house, when we bought it for 130, I looked the other day or a while back, and I think it sold most recently for like 310 or something like that. Right. So
not my shocked face, because that's probably
that's
right
what
over
it is.
there. Yeah.
So this is something I talk about all the time when I get on these is, I care about people's ability to be able to buy a home. And it's not because, I like to do loans. Loans are great, all that stuff. But that's how we build wealth in the United States, is through equity in real estate. And it's been that way for a very, very long time. And I have a very big concern that my children, when they go buy a home, now my kids will probably be okay because they got dad and mom to help them. And, we can give them some money for the down payment. Yeah. That's right. We've been fortunate, and we'll be able to pass that to them. But there's a whole lot of people that don't have that. And so what happens to the next generation of homeowners when all we see, even right now, that are being built, there's not even, the single family starts are unbelievably low as to what they should be. We're still at record low inventory, even with rates at 8%. They're not there anymore. They're like in the 6s now. But even then, everybody's like housing crash. The crash didn't happen. It's not going to happen because they're not building more homes. People aren't selling their houses because they have a 3% interest rate. So they're not going anywhere. So what do we do about the next generation for housing? And are there any good answers to try to solve that problem?
Yeah. So I'm not going to tell you I have it all figured out. It's actually going to be this. But it definitely is something that we've got to start having some conversation about. I will tell you, one of the things that is, just is on my heart, just because that's been my professional career, has been home ownership. And you're right. What difference does that make for the generation that has the benefit of that home ownership? It is just so huge that I don't think we can take our foot off the gas on some of that. Yeah. Doesn't mean that I'm not sensitive to national trends of saying that there is some trending towards people wanting to have more flexibility in their housing and be able to rent for periods of time in their life. I just personally don't think that's every time in their life.
So the only thing I'd give you pushback on that one is I've seen that too, where they say, well, the next generation, they like communal living and they want to move and be flexible. There is a certain amount of statistics that show that. But I think the only thing that lags on that is that once somebody turns, because we got married when I was 21, 22 years old. We had kids before we were in our 30s. Okay. So household formation has been delayed. People are having families later. They're forming families later on. I've seen many situations where, when someone's 32 and under, they want to move, they want to live in the city, they want to do all the fun things that you do when you don't have a family and kids and responsibilities. But as soon as they get married and as soon as they have kids, they're trying to get out of all that. And so, yes, there is a generation of people that are in their late 20s and 30s that are saying, yeah, we like this. But then they're very quickly moving over into, well, I liked it then, but I don't like that anymore. I want my single family.
I need to grow up into a more sustainable living source to protect me and my family for that next 30 years or more on that. And so that's where my concern is, just specifically speaking to Arlington as a jurisdiction. We're sitting right now at a 46% tenancy ratio. With what has already gone through P&Z and council will likely get to
what does that mean? I'm sorry.
So 50% tenant, 50% owner occupant.
I got you. Okay.
And so there has not been a focus from council to really advocate for ownership model to come from a development community. And so that's where I think some of it has to start, is looking at how can we really encourage the developers to come in and build product that will fit for us, so that we can help have some diversity in housing and make sure that we're meeting needs on the whole spectrum. People from their 20s coming into a first home to 30s, 40s, 50s, and then senior housing too. It's all important, but it is also, in my opinion, important to have it not just on a rental model, but also on an ownership model. So you're
talking about like incentivizing builders to somehow, some way. I mean, we incentivize the Cowboys to build a $20 billion stadium. Like, I'm sure we could figure out how to incentivize some builders.
And when you look at it from a developer standpoint, well, okay, if I'm not really getting any pushback and I can go and buy this land and I can put on, whether it's an apartment complex or what we're seeing more now of this horizontal multifamily. So it looks like a cute little starter neighborhood, but it is not individually platted. It is really all owned by one entity, and they are leasing it more like an apartment based model. Well, why, if I'm a developer, why am I not going to want to do that? Because if I was just selling them as a single family,
more money.
I'm only going to make money one time on it. If I sell it over here and have this for the next 50 years, I'm making the money on the back of those tenants for the next 50 years. And in my opinion, creating more working poor for our community, that really, because those rents are just going to go up and up and up for that property as the property declines. Really.
Well, there's a reason that the BlackRocks of the world and all these people have gotten into this, is because it's profitable. There's a lot of money in it. So you have to figure out how to move the profit from the multifamily rental model and try to get it more so into the single family model to have that.
Yeah. So from an attainable housing perspective, like, we're going to need some multifamily. I can't sit here and say, like, I would never go for any sort of multifamily. I can't have any, but ultimately we've got to figure out how to draw out some of that ownership model and some of that other diversity in housing. Otherwise, we're not going to continue to move forward. We're going to get, in my opinion, farther back with a resident mix that is more of a user base than a feeding in base. And so, there's just some of that line that we've really got to make sure that our residents, whether they're a tenant or they're an owner occupant, that they feel committed to our community and that they're here to really be a part of it and not feel like they're just at a stopping point on the way to their next place.
Do you think, with your experience talking to the current, city management and even on the state level, do you think that they're aware? I know they're aware of it. Do you think that this is a point of focus for them? Or, because, I mean, odds are, if you're running for council or you're doing whatever, you probably have a decent, income lifestyle that you've lived. And so you probably own your home and, whatever. So that isn't impacting them personally on a day-to-day basis. So is it a focus of the people in office right now, or the people in those positions, to even want to try to figure out how to fix that issue?
I think it is. I just think it's the lens of how you're looking through it on, and how to make sure that we are we're just going in the right direction on it.
Right.
And I will tell you, it was one of the things that did motivate me to come to this. Was some of that was that I served on which has gotten a super bad rap in Arlington, but this residential infill committee, where our goal was to look at our current zoning laws and our ordinances and say, okay, is there room to bring that a little more into modern time to help entice development to come in just with pure zoning changes, not ED dollars, not anything of that, but are we losing developers because they're looking at opportunities and saying the zoning doesn't work there, I'm going to go somewhere else.
Right.
And some of those conversations didn't go anywhere with mayor and council currently because for whatever reason. And so that's where I do think there is some opportunity to really cause some light to come on that and say, we've got to figure out housing. We've got to make it grow in a different way, and not in a really, for Arlington anyway, not in a way that we're really looking to up the population growth all that much, but we are looking to make sure that we are taking care of the people that are here and that they're in the appropriate size and priced home that they should be.
Do you think there might be any opportunity? One of the things that I've noticed recently, at least in the news, and we'll see, because I don't think it's been fully played out yet, but there's a lot of concern on commercial real estate right now that, if there is any type of real estate bubble, that's probably the place that it is, because, you have a multiple different factors, the work from home, the COVID, issues that happened. There's a lot more, there's no need for the office necessarily. I think warehouses and whatnot are still doing good because of all the goods and stuff being shipped. But even apartment complexes, because they built, I think people forget, if you're going to build a $20 million apartment complex, that's a 4 or 5 year project. That's not something that just happens in, 6 months, at least from what I understand. And so you contracted to get everything in place to build this place 3 or 4 years ago, get all your permits and everything through. Now you're starting construction. And now all of a sudden it's like, wait a minute, now we've got apartments everywhere. We've got office buildings everywhere. So do you think that there's any opportunity in that area, because there may be a downturn in that market with less and less, people renewing their commercial leases, to where either you can take commercial buildings and, reuse them and put them in more of a residential type of situation, or even, tear them down and use the land? Because that's the big cost, especially Arlington, Mansfield is, there's not a lot of land. There's no land.
Yeah. So we've actually talked about this, like us looking for office space and trying to figure out what the right thing is on that. And it is, in Arlington anyway, we are still seeing a pretty low vacancy rate from an office perspective. There are some retail and those kind of things that are have a little bit higher vacancy. Ultimately, my concern of Arlington is that we are kind of tired in some of those commercial corridors too. And so it may be some necessary things to have happen of some of those properties to look at a way to rebirth into something else. Right. Former Mayor Williams said that Arlington was under demolished. And there definitely are some places in Arlington that are under demolished. And so some of that is, and this may be where then there are some more public-private partnerships that are options of being able to come and say, how can we prep this land to get it ready for what we believe is the next generation for this land to be? And really helping to get to a place where then developers are really more enticed and looking at, okay, that is something that's interesting to me, because they're not having to do, there's not as much hair on that deal kind of thing, right? That they're seeing that they're going to have to deal with.
Right. So we're almost at an hour here. So I want to ask you one more thing, because I know you got, I'm sure you've got 7 million other things you got to get to. So I'll get you out of here. But I want to get your thoughts on what you think, where the economy is kind of headed just in general, because, just like real estate, economies are local, they're not always national, but there's a lot of stuff in the news right now about, either we're already in a recession or we're headed that direction, and it could be very harsh, or, I see both sides. See people say, oh no, we're kind of bouncing back. It's on the upside. And then I see people like, no, this is the dead cat bounce. This is the dead cat bounce that's about to change, and that's not going to continue going forward. So from your, just for your own personal opinion, like, where do you think, all this stuff is headed?
I think we're kind of okay. I think housing is tough right now. It's something that we're going to struggle with, these interest rates and really having a lot of mobility happening. But I don't think we're so hamstrung that there's nothing happening. But I'd actually be interested to hear what you have to say on that too.
Well, if I had to put money on it, if I was in Vegas and I was putting money on it, I would say that we are probably headed towards a pretty good downturn. I think it's going to happen, or I think it's more likely to happen, I should say, just because there's a lot more issues in the banking sector than I think people understand. And I don't mean, Chase Bank and Bank of America, they're going to be fine. Okay. They're always going to be fine because they've got, Fed dollars in their back pocket that they can always get to if they ever need to, because they can't fail because they're not allowed to, because it would cause complete havoc. But I think there's so many things that are happening right now between, the war in Ukraine, which is causing a big strain globally on all kinds of issues with supply chain and everything else. Energy prices, getting more and more expensive. I also think that you're seeing, or we're going to start to see corporate earnings when those start coming out, because we're just out of Q1. Just barely out of Q1. So you're starting to see more and more of these earnings pop up, and those are starting to get worse. And the projections for where they're going to go are getting worse and worse and worse. And that's kind of, whenever the money supply shrinks because you have higher interest rates, less people borrowing, then there's less mobility. So the economy just isn't kind of churning at the same rate that it always does. Yeah. And that's when you start to see layoffs. And that's when if you're a publicly traded company and your job to your shareholders is to show a profit, then that's your job. And if sales go down, then one of the easiest, best, quickest ways to solve that problem is by laying people off. And we experienced it. I joke that, the mortgage industry in this situation was kind of like the canary in the coal mine, because we've already gone through that. We went through that over the last 8 or 9 months, where we had to contract pretty heavily because we went from the, craziest, most high flowing market that we've had in the history of real estate, because rates were at 2% and 3%, to they just slammed the brakes on and everybody went flying out of the car, because that's what happened.
Yeah.
And so we've experienced that, and we're kind of now starting to go on the uptrend. Yeah. So, but I don't think I don't think the rest of the economy has felt that. And my biggest thing is that we as a society, especially now, because social media is so big and all of our attention spans are like this. Right. So when you see something on the news that says, oh, the crash is coming, and then a week or two goes by and you're like, nothing happened. I'm still working. I'm still doing my thing. Everything's fine. We lose sight of, when you go back and look through history, these things don't happen overnight. There's a slow crawl down. There can be big events that cause things to go, but for the most part, it's a slow trend downward. And then you look back and you go, oh, wait a minute, like we were over there, now we're down here, and you feel it. But because our attention spans are so short, like we just we're fine. You know what I mean?
Well, and I think that real estate in general, like especially on the residential side, but even on the commercial side too, that we're feeling that even more because the Fed is starting to really use that rate as the lever that they're using to control. Yes. And that doesn't bode well for us long term. I mean, when I started hearing more and more of that does make me more nervous about what does that do for home ownership, and what does that do for kind of the reputation of home ownership on some of that too. If people are like, well, man, I'm done with that. If they're going to keep doing that and messing around with me of, okay, maybe it's 2% and then maybe it's 8% the next time I come in. And then it just is too much volatility in that. Yeah. So I'm concerned about what that looks like for the industry.
Well, we have a CPI report that'll come out in early May. And the expectation, just in everything that I follow, is that it's actually going to be pretty good, because, and I understand it to a certain extent, but I still get a little confused because it has to do with how rents roll over. But there's always a lag in rents on the inflation data. And so there's usually it's something crazy like 6 months. And I think it's how leases turn over and when we get that data in. And so for a long time, or the last 6 or 8 months, rentals have been high, the rental market and the price. It was something like, I want to say it was like 30 or 40% that made up that boost, the higher level of inflation data. And so this is the first month where the trend for that will be, the data will come down. So the expectation is that the inflation data should be lower. Well, when that happens, then the Fed, more often than not, will start to slow their rate increases. So what the market thinks is that we'll have a good CPI data in May. Then the Fed will still raise rates one more time in their May meeting, probably a quarter of a point.
Right.
Yes. And then the next one, which I think is not until July, maybe, that the expectation in the market is that there will probably be a pause. Okay. But then where everybody thinks is that by the end of the year, they think the Fed's going to turn the knob back down and start doing QE. And I don't think that's going to happen. I think they're going to stay paused for a while until they get at least close, because what happens with inflation is it sticks.
Yeah.
Like once you get to a certain point, you can bring it down, but then it gets real sticky and you got to, let it play out a little bit. So, and I think that's where the downtrend in the market will start to occur, because the money will contract. People will think, oh no, it's going to be good. And then the Fed will come out in the middle of May and go, no, we're raising rates again. And then I think the market's going to go, because they're going to like, well, this is what we were expecting.
Yeah.
So
do you think general market or housing market or both?
See,
I'm still seeing a lot of cash on the sidelines on the housing too, that people are willing to come in and throw towards property.
Yeah.
And so that to me is helping to make sure that are helping to not get our prices where they're deflating in a significant way.
Well, there's still the problem with houses inventory
and inventory.
Yeah.
Yes.
We still have less than 2 months of inventory.
Yeah.
Now, the problem is with real estate, and because people read more national news than they read local news. And so when you see stuff, California is having a hard time with real estate, but that's because half the state moved out of California and moved to Texas and Tennessee and Florida and everywhere else.
Yeah.
So, and oh, by the way, all of Silicon Valley and all of the tech industry took a huge hit and laid off hundreds of thousands of people. So yes, that market is having a hard time. We are not experiencing that in Texas. We haven't. Yeah. And there was only maybe 3 or 4 months, I would say.
Less velocity in the housing market, but definitely not
an impact
on pricing at all. Yes.
No.
So
it hasn't changed. And until, because that's where I talk to people about this every day. So it's until they say, well, I'm going to wait for pricing to come down. Well, it's not, because the minute that rates do come down, which the expectation is within the next, say, 12 to 24 months, we might be into the 4s and 5s again. Okay. It's not getting to 2s and 3s unless there's just a massive crash and, Fed starts buying mortgage-backed securities again. But even at 4s and 5s, all of the people that have been sitting on the sideline going, well, I'm just going to wait, they're all going to come flooding back in. And so the 2 months of housing inventory that we barely have right now, if that happens and it doesn't improve between now and then, it's going to be next to nothing.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And like you said, the cash is still coming in. The investors are still buying. I mean, I read the other day, and again, this is in Dallas Morning News. So in 2022, in Tarrant County, 50% of the homes sold were sold to companies and investors.
Yeah, I saw that too.
That's insane.
I know. I did question that with NAR to see if they could get us real data on it. But it is what, I'm sure they're right. It's just one of those that,
or even if it's close to that, it's 40%.
If it's close. Yeah. Because I'm not seeing that as much on a real time basis, just from
anecdotal, the stuff that the transactions that you do.
We're looking at, because I'm seeing every transaction that our company is doing, and I'm not seeing those kind of institutional buyers, but they could be coming in and buying, REIT blocks where, that is what's impacting it. So
well, they're probably not using a realtor, really. If you've got $2 million in an investment fund, you're just going to the seller and you're saying, hey, I'm going to pay you this much and be done with it.
Yeah. And that's what I just am interested to see, like what that mix is of pure residential versus some of the multifamily and how some of that goes. Cause I think it's a really interesting question. And if that is really happening, we are in a totally different point in our history of how housing has gone.
Well, and the problem is that this is a situation where housing has always been a big driver for GDP. It's always been a big driver for American citizens' wealth creation, right? And if that dries up and goes away, okay,
businesses get it instead.
What becomes, that's my biggest fear, honestly. And I don't know if it's 10 or 15 years out. Even for our industry, right? What happens if all the residential market, not because of contraction of the economy, but just because of the nature of that, letting us have these commercial interests come into this industry and take over? There's no need for loan officers anymore. Look, BlackRock isn't calling me to get their FHA mortgage for that house, right? Yeah. And they're not calling you to list it. So this is, look at the stock market. Stock market's a great example. Right now in the stock market, there's something called dark pools. Have you ever heard of this?
Oh.
So if I buy Tesla stock, okay, I put an order in with Vanguard to buy Tesla stock for, let's say, $120 a share. Okay. All right. Well, when that order is placed, it goes into a dark pool. And this dark pool now is selling I'm not buying Tesla. I'm buying from a set of investors that get to decide what price they want to sell to me or buy from before it actually goes to the open market to, like, if I was buying your stock and you were selling, because that's how it works, right? I buy yours, you buy mine. Yeah. So it gets put to the side first. This is where Robinhood got into a bunch of trouble because Robinhood was taking all their trading and they were just offsetting it by like a penny. right? 2 pennies. It was very small.
Fraction of a penny.
Fraction of a penny.
Yeah.
But that's billions of dollars when you have trillions of dollars moving through the market, right?
Yeah.
So what happens if that model gets into housing to where BlackRock says, or Blackstone or Vanguard or whoever,
Yeah.
I don't mean to pick on them,
Yeah.
but even though I should, but what happens when they have a pool of 100 homes that they want to move, but it doesn't make it to the market? It gets offered on the quiet commercial market first, if there's any takers, and then that's how everything gets transacted, and the individual consumer is left completely out of that metric. I mean, that's the place we could go in a not a really long period of time.
And in some ways that may not be the worst thing for the consumer if they have an opportunity at purchase of it. I went to some training on NFT and blockchain and how that relates to real estate, which I get is like,
we could talk for hours
far
on
away
that.
on that too. But there are some ways that we can pull some transactional cost out of that to potentially be a benefit to the consumer, but not in this way, not in a way where we have these massive entities that are really trading these huge blocks of rental properties and leaving so many of our residents in those rental communities that are just going up and up on their rent prices. Per demand.
I don't know the solution to it. I just, my hope is people just keep talking about it and keep trying to figure out how to solve the problem. I mean, there isn't a way out of it right now. And unfortunately, when the little guy's competing against millions and billions of dollars, more often than not, they don't win. But that's why we need really conscientious people like you in office to be able to at least call that stuff out and make it a focus, right? Bringing it all back. So
we'll see what we can do.
Well, I appreciate you coming in. Like I said, I know you're a busy lady and you got a lot of stuff on your plate. So I thank you for stopping by with me for an hour to talk about all this stuff. I'm sure we just solved all the problems. So, everything's fixed and the world's great, but, but thanks for coming, and we'll have you, once you win, I'll have you come back in and we'll talk about that. So
sounds good.
Thanks for everybody that stuck around, and we'll see you next time.